You don't need another video to tell you what's wrong with your life. You already know. You know which habits are holding you back. You know where you're undisciplined, distracted, or avoiding responsibility. And you know that nothing external is coming to fix it for you. This isn't about inspiration. It's about honesty. Because if you're still waiting for clarity, motivation, or permission, then you're choosing to stay exactly where you are. Radical personal responsibility means accepting, without distortion or defense, that your life is the direct result of your decisions, habits, standards, and tolerances. It is not a slogan or a motivational concept. It is a practical position. When you take radical responsibility, you stop explaining your situation through circumstances, luck, timing, or other people's behavior. You acknowledge that while you may not control everything that happens to you, you are fully accountable for how you respond, what you allow to continue, and what you choose to ignore. This mindset removes the illusion of innocence and replaces it with something far more useful: agency. Most people avoid this level of responsibility because it is uncomfortable. It requires you to confront the gap between who you claim you want to be and how you actually behave each day. It exposes inconsistency. It removes the comfort of excuses. Radical responsibility forces you to admit that the reason things haven't changed yet is not because you lacked information, support, or opportunity, but because you repeatedly chose familiarity over effort. This isn't an attack. It's a clarification. Because once you accept that your current position is self-created, you also accept that your future is self-correctable. Taking full responsibility changes how you interpret failure. Instead of blaming external obstacles, you analyze your preparation, your discipline, and your follow-through. Instead of seeing setbacks as proof that something is wrong with you, you see them as data. Where did you cut corners? Where did you hesitate? Where did you rely on motivation instead of structure? Radical responsibility replaces emotional reaction with strategic adjustment, and that shift alone separates people who stagnate from people who progress. This level of ownership also eliminates the need for validation. When you are responsible for your outcomes, you no longer require permission to act or reassurance to continue. You stop waiting to be understood. You stop needing your struggle to be acknowledged before you take action. Your standards become internal rather than negotiated with your environment, and your behavior becomes consistent regardless of external conditions. Radical personal responsibility is demanding because it leaves no room for passive living. It requires daily awareness, self-regulation, and honesty. You must monitor what you tolerate, what you repeat, and what you delay. You must recognize that every avoided task, every broken promise to yourself, and every moment of distraction is a vote for the life you claim you don't want. This form of responsibility is not about guilt or self-punishment. It is about clarity, control, and the willingness to live without excuses. Discipline over mood means understanding that your emotional state is an unreliable guide for decision-making, especially when it comes to long-term improvement. Moods fluctuate based on sleep, stress, environment, and countless variables outside your control. If your actions depend on how you feel in the moment, your progress will always be unstable. Discipline exists to remove emotion from the equation. It is the structure that keeps you moving forward on days when motivation is absent, confidence is low, or resistance feels justified. Most people wait to feel ready before they act, believing that the right emotional state will make effort easier. In reality, action is what creates emotional alignment, not the other way around. Discipline reverses the sequence. You act first, consistently and deliberately, and allow feelings to follow, or not. This approach builds reliability. You become someone who can be counted on by yourself, which is a rare and valuable form of self-trust. When you act regardless of mood, you stop being controlled by temporary discomfort and start operating from long-term intention. Discipline is often misunderstood as harshness or deprivation, but it is better understood as self-leadership. It is the ability to set a standard and enforce it without internal negotiation. When you repeatedly decide whether or not to show up based on how you feel, you weaken your authority over yourself. Every time you follow through despite resistance, you reinforce that authority. Over time, this compounds into confidence, not the emotional kind, but the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you do what you said you would do. Choosing discipline over mood also creates mental clarity. You waste less energy debating, delaying, and rationalizing. The decision has already been made in advance. The routine exists whether you feel like engaging with it or not. This reduces cognitive load and emotional friction. allowing you to conserve energy for execution rather than internal conflict. Consistency becomes simpler when it is non-negotiable. When discipline becomes your default, moods lose their power over your direction. Bad days no longer derail progress. They simply become part of the process. You stop needing ideal conditions to move forward. You operate from commitment instead of convenience. This shift is subtle but decisive, because over time, the person who acts regardless of mood outpaces the person who waits to feel ready in every meaningful area of life. Mental and physical self-control is the ability to govern your impulses instead of being governed by them. In a world designed to constantly stimulate, distract, and reward short-term pleasure, self-control has become a competitive advantage. It is not about extreme restriction or denial, but about conscious regulation. Every impulse you follow without thought trains your nervous system to expect immediate gratification, while every impulse you resist strengthens your capacity to choose long-term outcomes over short-term relief. This process shapes your character in ways that are subtle but cumulative. Mental self-control begins with attention. What you focus on repeatedly becomes your mental environment, and your environment influences your standards, expectations, and tolerance for discomfort. When your mind is constantly occupied by noise, comparison, and low-effort stimulation, it becomes difficult to engage in sustained effort or deep thinking. You lose the ability to sit with difficulty without escaping it. Developing mental control means deliberately limiting unnecessary inputs, choosing when and where your attention goes, and training yourself to remain present even when boredom or discomfort arises. Physical self-control reinforces mental discipline. The body and mind are not separate systems. They influence each other continuously. When you allow physical habits to deteriorate through neglect, excess, or inconsistency, mental resilience weakens alongside them. Regulating sleep, nutrition, movement, and posture may appear basic, but they form the foundation of self-command. When your body is under control, your mind becomes more stable. When your body is chaotic, your thoughts tend to follow the same pattern. Self-control is often mistaken for willpower, but willpower alone is fragile. True control is built through systems and boundaries. It is easier to maintain discipline when your environment supports it, and harder when everything around you encourages indulgence. Designing your surroundings to reduce friction, remove unnecessary temptation, and support healthy routines is a practical expression of self-respect. You are not weak for needing structure. You are realistic. As mental and physical self-control strengthen, your tolerance for discomfort increases. You become less reactive, less impulsive, and less dependent on external stimulation to regulate your mood. You begin to notice the space between impulse and action, and within that space lies choice. That choice, repeated daily, determines whether you drift through life reacting to circumstances or move forward deliberately with clarity and restraint. Resilience through discomfort is the capacity to remain functional, focused, and committed while experiencing difficulty, uncertainty, or strain. It is not about enjoying hardship or forcing intensity for its own sake, but about removing the expectation that progress should feel comfortable. Many people abandon meaningful goals, not because the work is impossible, but because they interpret discomfort as a signal to stop. Resilience reframes discomfort as a normal and unavoidable part of growth, not as evidence of failure or misalignment. Discomfort appears whenever you move beyond familiar patterns. It shows up when routines change, when standards increase, and when effort becomes sustained rather than occasional. The nervous system naturally resists these shifts, preferring predictability over improvement. Without resilience, this resistance is mistaken for danger, and avoidance becomes the default response. Building resilience means learning to stay present with discomfort without reacting impulsively, escaping prematurely, or lowering standards to regain short-term relief. Resilience is developed through repeated exposure, not through intellectual understanding. Each time you continue despite resistance, your threshold expands slightly. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Challenges that once triggered emotional shutdown become tolerable. This gradual adaptation is how strength is built, quietly, consistently, and without dramatic moments. Avoidance weakens resilience, while engagement strengthens it, regardless of how small the effort appears. Discomfort also provides clarity. When things are easy, habits remain unexamined. When pressure increases, weaknesses become visible. You learn where discipline breaks down, where patience runs thin, and where self-regulation fails. These moments are not setbacks, they are diagnostic. Resilient individuals use discomfort as feedback rather than as a verdict. They adjust, refine, and continue rather than retreat. Over time, resilience changes your relationship with difficulty. You stop interpreting struggle as a sign that something is wrong and begin to see it as evidence that something meaningful is underway. You no longer require constant reassurance that you are on the right path. You develop confidence not from success alone, but from knowing that you can endure the process required to achieve it. This capacity to remain steady under pressure is what separates short-term effort from long-term progress, and it is built only by staying when leaving would be easier. Long-term consistency is the deliberate practice of showing up day after day, even when results are slow, invisible, or easily overshadowed by distraction. It is not flashy or dramatic. It is quiet, repetitive, and often unglamorous work. Most people overestimate what can be achieved in a single effort and underestimate what can be achieved through steady, disciplined repetition. True progress is rarely the result of one intense push. It is the accumulation of small, deliberate actions maintained over months and years. This is what separates those who drift through life hoping for change from those who shape it intentionally. Consistency is more than habit. It is a commitment to structure, standards, and patience. It requires establishing routines that align with long-term goals and enforcing them even when motivation fades. Motivation is fleeting, but consistency is reliable. By following the same processes, regardless of mood or external conditions, you build momentum that compounds quietly over time. Missing a single day may feel insignificant, but repeated lapses erode progress, weaken self-trust, and reinforce a mindset that allows excuses to dictate behavior. Long-term consistency is about designing your life so that your daily actions are inevitable rather than negotiable. Consistency also demands the ability to tolerate slow progress. In a culture obsessed with instant results, people are prone to abandon effort when outcomes do not appear quickly. Yet the reality of meaningful growth is that results are often delayed. Muscle takes months of disciplined training. Knowledge takes years of study and application. Financial stability takes persistent planning and management. Each day of consistent effort is a deposit that compounds silently, often unseen until enough time has passed for the balance to become substantial. Learning to trust the process without immediate feedback is a key aspect of long-term consistency. Another dimension of long-term consistency is resilience to disruption. Life is unpredictable, and external circumstances will inevitably interfere with plans. The person committed to long-term consistency adapts routines without abandoning them. They account for setbacks, interruptions, and failures, but do not allow these events to break the rhythm entirely. By creating systems, rituals, and boundaries that support ongoing effort, consistency becomes less about heroic moments of willpower and more about structural inevitability. This principle extends across all areas: physical, mental, professional, and relational, because growth in any domain relies on repeated, sustained effort rather than sporadic intensity. Finally, long-term consistency builds credibility with yourself. Each day you honor your commitments, you reinforce your self-trust, your standards, and your capacity to achieve. Over time, consistency compounds not only results but also identity. You begin to see yourself as the type of person who acts deliberately, reliably, and with purpose, which makes maintaining effort easier and deviations less likely. Truth-based self-improvement is the practice of confronting yourself with unflinching honesty about your habits, decisions, and patterns, even when the truth is uncomfortable. It rejects flattering narratives, wishful thinking, and motivational cliches in favor of clear-eyed assessment. Most people engage in self-improvement superficially, focusing on what feels inspiring rather than what is effective. They chase ideals without measuring the gap between their current state and their desired state, which leads to repeated frustration and stagnation. Truth-based improvement starts by acknowledging exactly where you are, without distortion or excuses, and using that awareness as the foundation for deliberate action. At its core, truth-based self-improvement is about accuracy. It requires identifying the behaviors, tolerances, and compromises that are holding you back, instead of blaming circumstances, external forces, or other people. Every missed deadline, every skipped workout, every impulsive decision is a data point, not a moral judgment. By examining these data points honestly, you gain clarity on what needs to change and why. This approach removes emotional bias from decision-making and allows you to take targeted action rather than reacting haphazardly to fleeting inspiration or guilt. Truth-based self-improvement also demands accountability. You must measure progress honestly, track failures without shame, and resist the temptation to reinterpret reality to preserve comfort. It is tempting to claim improvement based on effort alone, but effort without results is not meaningful if it does not move you closer to the goals you genuinely value. By focusing on measurable outcomes and observable changes, you create feedback loops that inform adjustments and prevent stagnation. This requires patience, discipline, and a willingness to face the friction between who you are and who you want to become. Another essential aspect is resisting shortcuts disguised as wisdom. Quick fixes, overly simplistic advice, or emotionally satisfying strategies often appeal to the desire for immediate validation, but they rarely produce lasting change. Truth-based improvement emphasizes long-term, practical, and sustainable strategies, even when they are inconvenient or slow. It prioritizes learning from failure over avoiding it, and integrates incremental progress into a consistent framework rather than sporadic effort. Finally, truth-based self-improvement reshapes identity. By repeatedly facing the unvarnished reality of your actions and responding deliberately, you build integrity, self-trust, and clarity. You stop relying on narratives about potential or intention, and instead become defined by actual behavior, measured effort, and tangible results. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where honesty fuels action, action produces growth, and growth reinforces the value of truthfulness in self-management. The changes you need are not hidden. They've been visible to you all along. Real growth begins when you act on what you already know, without excuses or delay. Commit to discipline, embrace discomfort, and take responsibility for your life. Your future is built by the choices you make today, consistently and honestly.